Hey everyone, welcome to Pit Stops To Podium, the RevPartners podcast where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tellison. I serve as the co-founder and CEO of RevPartners, and I'm delighted to invite Cassie Yettru to this edition of Pit Stops To Podium. Welcome, Cassie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are delighted to have you. And for those that may not know who Cassie is is a expert in the software and startup world, specializing in sales recruiting, as well as a talent advisor, where she's been at CloserIQ since 2017 and has closely been working with Wise since 2019. Cassie, for those who may not know who Wise or CloserIQ is, this would be your opportunity to give the soft pitch of this company.
Yeah, for sure. So I run Wise, which is a division of CloserIQ. So Wise is a global community empowering women in sales. And CloserIQ is a talent strategy firm specializing in connecting companies with top sales and engineering talent. So like you said, started at CloserIQ and was a sales recruiter for a long time, managed a team of sales recruiters, and then pivoted to become the general manager of Wise back in 2019 and have been running that as a business unit for the past couple of years.
Well, I think that's some good context as to the big idea, which we'll get to in just a second, which is really around the value of professional development for career success. But before we do that, Cassie, we have a tradition here at Pit Stops To Podium, and that's to get to know our guests outside of work. So what are some passions or hobbies that our audience should know about you?
Yeah, I am a huge animal lover. I have a dog that I love more than anything and have been riding horses my whole life, rode in college, and still do that on the side now when I have time. Love to cook, love to bake, and then really take advantage of all the things that Colorado has to offer. So skiing, camping, hiking, all the outdoorsy, cliche, quintessential Colorado activities, really.
What's the last thing you baked?
Baked? Let's see. Probably a coconut cake over Christmas.
Oh, nice. I baked some banana bread with, I've got into baking. I just got a bread maker and I've been messing around. So banana bread was the most recent thing I made. I was just curious what kind of baking you're into.
Yeah, all the things. That's great.
All right, well, let's get into the big idea, which, in light of what you've been doing for quite a while now, there is this importance around networking for career success. I don't think that's a novel concept, but I think you bring a unique lens into it, given your experience and expertise. So as we get started, I think a good question to frame it is, what does networking mean to you, and why is it important to career development?
Yeah. Networking to me is just growing, right? I think if you're not networking, you're probably a little bit complacent and aren't doing anything to broaden your horizons, get different perspective, et cetera. I think a lot of times hindsight is 20/20, and people that are a little bit earlier on in their careers don't realize the value of professional development until they're in a situation where they really need it. And that's why I think really simplifying it to growing makes it pretty easy to digest, but it just means that you are growing your perspective, your knowledge, your literal network of people that you know, et cetera. But it encompasses a lot, but I think saying is simply that it's growing is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think that's a great definer. And given, everyone's seeing the headlines going on right now as we record this. There's a lot of fear and uncertainty as to what this means. And so I would imagine that one desire to growing, but more importantly, having that network is going to be more and more important as we move forward, for better or worse, candidly. But so for those that either, that are looking to get into networking, let's start there. So what are some steps or must-do things that they must become good at networking?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts here, but I think the first thing is just to start, right? I think networking in general can be this kind of intimidating term that people just don't know where to begin with it. But first thing is to just start. Pick one thing that you're going to do and then let that open up the door to it. But being consistent, I think, is really important, and figuring out what works for you. Are you still living in a major city and you have access to a lot of in-person events, or are you in a rural area or in the suburbs and you need to look at more virtual opportunities? I think figuring out what will make sense for you and then setting some sort of goal, both on consistency, whether it's one event a quarter, one coffee conversation a quarter or a year or a month, whatever it might be. And then also having a goal around what you want to get out of it. So are you trying to pivot into new industries and you want to learn more about what that looks like and whether you actually want to make the pivot? Are you thinking about getting into leadership and you want to talk to leaders who have made that jump from being an individual contributor to a leader recently? Are you learning a new sales methodology, looking at a new platform, but really just having a clear goal around what am I trying to get out of this right now? And obviously that will change. And then what your consistency is. Doesn't have to be this huge thing. You don't need to go to Dreamforce to start networking. It could be something really simple and low key. And then the last piece I would say on networking is try not to do it with your coworkers if you're in a position to do that. If you go with a couple buddies from the office and you go to a networking event, you're probably going to stick to each other. If you do go with them, don't talk to each other, right? Maybe you go together and you leave together and you get dinner or drinks afterwards, but encourage each other to talk to people individually so that you're not using that person or people as a little bit of a crutch so that you all can go and learn. And then you're meeting different people and can share those ideas and connections as well. So it's a little comforting to go with people you know, but I'd recommend not doing it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your original point is the intent of networking is growth. And if you are going to limit your access to people you already know, then you're not really stretching yourself. It's a good first step to your second point. However, it is not achieving the ultimate outcome. So for those that are thinking through, we talked a little bit. So, hey, desire is growth. Be clear about what you're trying to achieve is what you're going to next. How do they, and you talked a little bit about, did they do this in person versus digital? Let's double click on that for a second. So it sounds like, hey, what you want to achieve and where you're located will likely dictate the right channel or opportunity. But how should our audience be thinking through what makes sense for them?
In terms of how to network?
Yeah, like what is it a physical event? Is it a digital event? Or what's the right community for them?
So I think there are always a couple different ways that you can do it. There are generally opportunities internally at your organization, whether you are at a very early stage startup and you have 5 other coworkers, maybe they have said, you know what, let's go to this in-person event because you're probably in a large city if you're doing that at an early stage startup. And then larger companies often have ERGs, employee resource groups. So a lot of times they're focused on some sort of ethnicity or specific group. So that could be women at X company, LGBTQIA+ at X company, moms at X company, veterans, etc. And so a lot of times those groups will bring together opportunities to network and they'll bring in speakers and things like that. So I think that's a good way of doing it internally. A lot of times there are mentorship programs within large organizations where you can request to get mentored by someone in a different department, in a different office. Maybe it's in a different country, et cetera. So I think those 2 opportunities are really great to get perspective within your own organization and just really understand who else is here, what can I learn from them, how can I meet other people and figure out what they're going through and what they're struggling with and what they're doing well. And then when you think about external events, I think whether or not you're in a large city, most companies that are putting on events are now doing them virtually as well, obviously because of COVID. So the physical piece isn't as much of a limitation, but if you are in a city where you can go physically, I think it is great. We had an in-person event last October, and as much as I love talking to all of our members online, nothing does replace seeing them in person and, sharing a glass of wine and talking to them. Most of the time you can just Google your industry, a topic, a role, and your city, and you will see things pop up. Eventbrite is a great place that collects a lot of free events and things like that. So in terms of membership communities, I think that's another really great place to find others, especially when you think about who this podcast is geared towards and who's probably listening. So your Pavilions, Rev Genius, Modern Sales Pros, Wise, those are obviously within the sales, marketing, and just general leadership and executive focuses. But pretty much any type of role that you might be in, there's probably a community out there that maybe is free, maybe you have to pay something for it, and they vary in terms of what they offer from a benefit perspective as well. But that's a great way, I think, to find external perspective to supplement those ERGs and mentorship groups that might be happening within your own company.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's also this. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. So I think there's a temptation that in light of these communities are being created, to your point about Pavilion, Rev Genius, MSP, whatever it may be, there's different organizations based off of function. But if I'm an employer, whether I'm a CEO or the CRO, there's a temptation to say, I'm just going to outsource that for development. Like that exists. And they can take these classes. What would be your, not necessarily rebuttal, but your encouragement to say, hey, you do need to invest not only in like these, allowing for your employees to have outlets from a community perspective to learn, but there's also this internal career development that you need to have. How should they think about that? When should they start investing in it? Because that, I think I'm starting to see that more and more, that just go there. We're not going to invest in that internally. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I think you need to do both. And a lot of times it's the smaller companies that I think are prioritizing it more, but don't have the resources to do it yet, both from a time and a financial perspective. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to retain your talent, regardless of what department they are in, you need to support them. And I think offering them opportunities both externally, where they can meet other people and find other perspectives, and then also giving them really clear and defined career ladders, leadership development programs internally, mentorship. You need to do both. And at the end of the day, you may lose some good talent because they meet someone through one of those external partners or learn something that maybe they wouldn't have thought of even through the internal programming that you're offering that makes them leave. But at the end of the day, I think it's also really important that companies encourage the leaders that they have in place to show what they're doing and how they're engaging with it, because that will set the tone for what their reports do and what your new employees do as well. So when you have leaders that can be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm taking this online course from Udemy or Coursera because I want to learn this particular skill. And I'm also, I've got a mentor internally who encouraged me to do that. That is going to show your newer talent and newer employees that there are opportunities both internally and externally. So I think to answer your question, you can outsource some of it, but you also need to build programs internally. There's no perfect answer to it, but I think every company is finding the right mix that works for them. If you're a small company and you have no time or resources to do anything internally, you have to outsource it to show your employees that you're doing something. Whereas obviously, if you're at a larger company, they might be less eager.
Well, yeah, I think that maybe we agree, disagree here, and I don't disagree at that point. But I think there is a minimum, I think you would say, hey, regardless of how mature the organization is, like how do you incorporate this idea of like feedback from a performance perspective? How do you give, as it relates to development for your employees, make sure that you're creating some type of rhythm or cadence and potentially even structure as to say, hey, how do we show people how to not only develop, but from their skill set, competency, and the current role they're in, and maybe where they want to go. So how does that become an investment that all employees probably should make?
So I think there are a couple of things that you can do just to implement some of those practices and pieces that you mentioned. First of all, regardless of the size of your organization, upward performance reviews are imperative. We have them all the way up through our CEO. So even the people that report to our CEO fill out upward performance reviews on him, and HR culminates that feedback and then shares it with him anonymously so that it's not singling anyone out. But I think having those at every tier of leadership is really important so that every single employee feels like they have the opportunity to share feedback anonymously on their manager in a way that will be productively delivered back to them. And another thing that I don't think enough companies do, particularly when it comes to professional development, is having designated conversations with employees separate from performance reviews around what they are thinking about from their career's long-term perspective. So we have them internally. We call them PDMs, professional development meetings. And those are held quarterly, and they're separate from performance reviews, which are held biannually. And it's essentially, how do you see your career in the next 1, 3 to 5 years? do you still see yourself at the company in, I think it's 5 years? What other areas or roles are you interested in, both internally and externally, et cetera, et cetera? So we're asking those types of conversations or questions, so that our employees can really say, hey, I'm really enjoying this recruiting role, but people operations is something that I'm also kind of interested, or sales is something that I'm really interested in. And we've had some really impactful moves, both internally and externally, come from conversations like that. But I think those are really important to have.
Yeah, I like that, because we do that at our company, and it's a lot around, okay, I think it's kind of two aspects. One is just the company and the culture. Like, do you see yourself here for the long term? But the second gets into more, but you individually, what is it that you desire to do? And like that, it puts the burden on the employer to say, hey, how do I create a path for that individual to make sure that there is a role or a path for him or her to get to what she's passionate about? And so it's that alignment, really, and almost kind of there's the tour of duty concept of, hey, here's what I'm doing now, but here's where I want to go. And so you have that exchange and you have that transparency on both sides, which I think creates trust, candidly, and to ensure you have the right. It really allows for both sides to succeed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the person running HR at our company right now was not in an HR role 3 years ago and expressed in one of these meetings that it was something she was interested in. And she didn't get there immediately, to your point, but it opens up that talk track in a really honest way where employees don't feel that they're going to get in trouble, so to speak, for saying that they're interested in something else.
Well, that's great. Well, as we wrap up, Cassie, kind of the final lap, I think really I'll consolidate it down, and it's just really as people think through, hey, you kind of mentioned the intent is growth, and just take your next step. If you are encouraging our audience, hey, that next step, what are some very easy, practical wins as it relates to taking that next step?
Yeah, I think look for virtual events that are online. We do 2 a month. Many companies do them. You can sign up for them very easily. They are free. A lot of big companies and small companies in the tech space offer them. Pick something that has a topic that you are interested in. I think picking topic first and not caring so much about who's speaking on it is more important, because you want to think about, again, going back to what I said in the beginning, what are you trying to get out of this? Yeah. So pick a topic. What's top of mind for you right now? It's January of a new year. Search for something that's top of mind, sign up for an event, and set a goal for yourself to connect on LinkedIn with 2 people after that event. And I think that's, even if you don't do the LinkedIn connections, that's a really good to start. And
I think, to your point, it's an easier way to not, the temptation is to do something with your coworkers if it's in person, and virtual removes a little bit of that fear, if you will, of having to have that social aspect where you can just show up on a virtual screen and listen. So I think that's an easy next step that most of our audience can take. Well, Cassie, if our audience wants to take a next step to get to know you or ask you a question, what's the right way to engage with you?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is definitely the best place for right now. And then I can certainly share my email with you to give out as well. But LinkedIn for now is where I would direct folks.
Okay, great. Well, hey, thank you so much for stopping by. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure our audience will learn a lot from this as it relates to how to develop, both from a community perspective, but ultimately from a career development perspective internally. So thanks for the insights, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Take care.